everyone. Welcome to the October 2024 regular Board of Education meeting. I want to start us off in a good way by recognizing and acknowledging both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Trustees, looking for a mover to approve this evening's agenda. Thank you, Trustee Bayo, seconded by Trustee David. I know that we have one addition to the agenda, but are there any other changes or amendments? Okay, so I know that we want to add a motion under new business. I'm just going to put it in the chat and send it off to staff. I know Superintendent Whitten or Associate Superintendent Arts, perhaps you can help us just to ensure that everybody in the meeting receives a copy of that. I'll just read it into the records. And so this is again, just looking to add this to new business, that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to provide the board and the Equity Ad Hoc Committee with a breakdown of student to staff incidents for each elementary school, and further break down each elementary school's data into student to staff incidents in English track and student to staff incidents in French track. And within these categories, indicate the number of students with an IEP, a designation, indicate the designation, or an assigned learning support, note the nature of the assigned learning support by, and then a timeline to be determined. Okay, so that was one amendment. Are there any other amendments to the agenda? And then I'll look for a mover and a seconder to make those amendments. Or that amendment. Okay, I don't see any others. Would someone like to move the amendment and second it? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi. And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Bayo. Any discussion? Okay, and this is just calling the question in relation to adding, so amending the agenda. All those in favor with a show of hands? Trustee Kwan, would you mind indicating your vote verbally or, oh, and that's in favor. Okay, so that's unanimous. Okay, so now I'm going to call the question on the agenda as amended. All those in favor of the amended agenda, show of hands. And Trustee Kwan. Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, so I'm going to move us into our first item under A3, which is approval of the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes. Trustees, how would you like to proceed? Do you want to move these minutes as a group? Are there minutes that you would like to pull out and discuss separately? Does anyone have any amendments they would like to move to any of the minutes? Okay, then I'll suggest that we move the minutes as a group. Would someone like to do that? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi. So we're moving, let me just reiterate so everybody's on the same page. We're moving all the minutes together as a group under A3, A through C. This is our September 23rd regular board meeting minutes, October 1st, 2024 special open board meeting minutes, and October 10th special open board meeting minutes. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Painter. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes? And that is unanimous. Thank you again, trustees. We don't have, well, I shouldn't say that. We might. Do we have any business arising from the minutes? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to move us on. We don't have any district presentations tonight. We do have a community presentation this evening. I'd like to welcome Emma Hillian, who will be speaking to us about Sundance Bank Elementary. I just want to check in. I'm not seeing Emma in the group of participants. Yeah, Associate Superintendent Arts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Emma is not present at this time and they're not in the waiting room. So I can let you know if that changes, but not here now.
Okay. So perhaps we did get, started quite quickly and progress through our agenda quite quickly. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind just letting us know if they do arrive, we can always backtrack subject to my colleague's direction and create some space if Emma arrives shortly. I'm going to then move us on. We don't have any correspondence in our agenda this month. So the next item, while we are waiting to see if we have a presenter, is my chair's report. So you'll see that under C1A. There's a couple of things that I just want to highlight from the report, one of which is just a reminder for trustees to let me know if you do have any interest in representing our board on the BCSTA Childcare Working Group. We do have an invitation to participate. I'd also like to acknowledge that this month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So it's an internationally recognized public awareness campaign that's held each October, and really it's aimed at helping the public learn more about the importance of cybersecurity. This year's theme is Generation Cyber Safe, because online security knows no age, which I think is quite timely and certainly very relevant to the sector that we all operate within. The campaign helps both Canadians understand how to secure their online presence by teaching simple steps about how to protect themselves and their devices. And then there's a link in my report just to some of the resources that are available around Cybersecurity Month and information. Does anyone have any questions in relation to my report this month? Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm gonna again move us along. We are now at D. These are our standing committee reports and any recommended motions that came out of the various standing committees. The first is that D1. This is the Education Policy and Directions Committee. There are draft minutes for your information only. There was a recommended motion subject to further revision that Associate Superintendent Arts made to the Learning Resources Regulation. So the recommended motion is that the Board of Education accept a revised Regulation 6163.1 Learning Resources. So I think what I'll suggest is, because again, this was really a way to kind of move this along because it's come back a couple of times. But it also did require Associate Superintendent Arts to make some additional changes to the regulation in light of feedback that he received at Ed Policy. And so perhaps Associate Superintendent Arts, I could invite you to walk us through the further amendments that you've made to the regulation in light of the feedback that you received at Ed Policy.
Thank you, and through the chair, yes, happy to walk you through the changes that I made. As you mentioned, we have looked at this a few times. I think we are getting closer to the end here as we keep tightening this up. So the first change that was made is on page 37 of your packet in number 2B. There was a request to actually list the criteria for the selection of a learning resource here in the regulation. So it references both the criteria is outlined in policy 6163.1, and then it actually lists those criteria right there in the regulation. Also added that list and criteria to the appendix B, which is the request for reconsideration of a learning resource. So if someone is wanting to make a request for reconsideration, those criteria are clearly laid out for them right there in that form that they need to fill in. So that got included in both places. Also on page 37 of your packet, we had some discussion around the wording of the board may choose to include. And we're wanting that to be a little stronger, that the board was in favor of using FINESC or ministry recommended. So the wording has been changed to the board supports the use of these resources. So that changes there on page 37 as well. Next change is on page 38. Again, still under section 2, F was added to the end. And this is the statement that was regarding the making no cost barrier, the equity piece, which was originally in the opening paragraph. That has been moved, no change to the wording, but that is his own section 2F, that further access to learning resources need to be equitably available to all with no cost as a barrier to knowledge. So that was added there as we discussed. Then made further update on page 41 of the packet. which is under the request for reconsideration process. So the district level stage. So A4A 9, at the very end, the very last, we added in that the written decision that is made at this stage will include information about the stage 2 board level appeal process and a deadline for that to take place. So Trustee Painter had asked for that clarity to be added in there so people knew. That has also been added to the flow chart, which is Appendix A. That wording has been added in there, so it's very clear for someone who goes through there. And I believe that is the last of the changes that were made based on the feedback that came from our last meeting.
Thank you very much, Associate Superintendent Arts. That's appreciated. And thank you for the continued reiteration and work together to improve the document. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate and all your hard work in leading that. Okay, trustees, I'm going to open the floor first to our partners around the table. Want to check in to see if any of our partners have any feedback in relation to the draft regulation before the board this evening and the recommended motion, which is to accept the revised draft. Okay, so trustees, I'm going to turn to you now. Are there any comments, further amendments? Trustee Painter, kick us off.
Never short of an opinion. Two things that come to mind. First, it's at the board level that my concern is that if a person has not been satisfied with the decision that was made at that point in time, there's no indication of how they can either present or provide additional information to the board. Essentially, the board's going to have all the same information that the committee had without the years of experience and subject matter knowledge as teachers or librarians, educators in general. So it's one of those ones where I don't know how a different opinion would be rendered. And it seems to me that it's a basic principle of natural justice that people be allowed to represent themselves or represent their arguments. So there needs to be some sort of mechanism where someone who's providing or forwarding a complaint actually has the capacity to either add additional information or make a presentation. So that's one. And then the other one was I'm not seeing direction on how the district or the board, how the district responds if a decision is made to withdraw a learning resource. It's my hope that, because we're taking a neutral, broad-based approach to this, that this isn't a decision that's made for a single school only. And if we're withdrawing a resource, we see good reasons to withdraw a resource, that we're going to be doing that across the district. And if that's the case, then it should be specified, and also how that decision is going to be communicated out. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Okay, so were you suggesting some potential amendments then? So for instance, related to your first comment about the reconsideration process once it gets to the board. So we see the revisions at page 41 of the packet. I believe at B4, it speaks to what the board will be provided with. I note that it doesn't, perhaps the way that it's drafted currently, it doesn't make it clear that the board can also request information that it feels it requires in making the determination. But your point was actually more to do with creating some clarity in the process about the individual who is appealing to the board, providing them an opportunity to make representations to the board about their position and why they believe that it should be reconsidered. Is that right? Did you have some suggested language perhaps? I think it would be nice
Yep.
if we can move things forward by making some amendments and getting to the point where we can call this to a vote. But again, I'm at your discretion, so you let me know how you'd like to proceed.
I would be prepared to move forward with a new V. So following 4, on page 41, the board will be provided with the following. A new V that would indicate the requester will have the opportunity to present any additional information in relation to their submission or their request.
So sorry, you're suggesting that that there would be a new V so that the
Yeah.
current V would just sort of be moved down and there would be a new V that speaks to this idea of the requester having an opportunity to make representations to the board.
That's right.
Okay. And so sorry, just would you mind reiterating the language you're suggesting that we consider? And perhaps would you mind just putting it in the chat and then
I'll
that way
put it in the
staff.
chat.
Yeah, thank you. And don't feel pressure, just take your time. I know it's difficult when it's live and suddenly you have to do drafting on the fly. And once you've got a working draft, Trustee Painter, I'll suggest that you throw it into the chat and then we can always do some wordsmithing together, if that would be helpful. While Trustee Painter is working on that suggested amendment, does anyone else have any comments in relation to this particular section? Oh, there we go. It's actually in the chat. Okay. So it reads, the requester will be advised of their ability to supplement their initial request with supplemental information to be considered by the board.
Yes, and if I can do just a correction and delete the supplemental. I was on a roll, obviously.
Okay, so it would read that the requester will be advised of their ability to supplement their initial request with information to be considered by the board. Okay, does anybody have any thoughts or suggestions? Perhaps we can either call it to, I can look for a seconder, or we can perhaps do some wordsmithing. I'm wondering if we want to have a more general, high-level statement, just inviting the requester will be invited to make representations to the board in relation to their request for reconsideration, something like that. Create a little bit more of a high-level direction. So like it could be the requester will be invited to presentations to the board in respect to their request for reconsideration. Oh boy, at the end of the day, the fingers are tired. There we go. In the chat, that's another option. Trustee Painter, what are your thoughts? Did you want to move an amendment? Are you happy with either of those possible wording? And if so, then I will ask you to move that.
I would move the your wording. The requester will be invited to make representations.
Okay, so it says the requester will be invited to make representations to the board in respect to their request for reconsideration. And does Trustee Painter have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi. Okay, so I think we'll do like one amendment at a time just for clarity. Do our partners around the table have any thoughts that they would like to share in respect to this? Yeah, President Howe, go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, it seems to me that this may be covered by what the form includes. So when you're thinking about this, when you're considering this amendment, I would anticipate that the form would allow the person to add additional information. So I just thought that was worth considering. I don't know what else the form would be.
Thank you, President Howe. Should we go to the form? Yeah, Trustee Painter, go ahead.
It's my understanding the form is what's submitted at the start of the process. And so where I was interested is the person's not satisfied with the response from the committee and is obviously looking for reconsideration of that decision. And so at that point, they may have information that wasn't included in the form. That was my thought.
Thank you for that clarification, Trustee Painter, and thank you, President Howe, for the point. Well made. Okay, so any other comments in relation to this particular amendment? Okay, I don't see any, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the amendment with a show of hands. And Trustee Gagnon, would you mind indicating your vote? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And that is unanimous. Okay. I'm now going to look again. Trustee Painter, did you have a further amendment that you wanted to make? And can you remind us where that might be considered? What part?
I would suggest this is either a new 6 or a 7 on the following page.
Would you mind just directing us to the, okay, so sorry, that's then page 42 of the pack-up for those that want to follow.
Yes, page 42.
Okay. And so you're suggesting it would be a new.
Well, this is where I would defer to staff to identify an appropriate approach. I'm happy to draft some language for a conversation, but I'll finish this and put it into chat.
Okay, so can you just clarify what you'd like staff to give us some advice on?
First, whether or not a decision to withdraw a learning resource in the regulation as envisioned is intended for a single school or for the district, for all schools within that level that would have that resource. And then how that decision would be communicated.
Okay.
And I just want to throw out a caveat that I appreciate that this might not be a blanket one, that there could be some nuance. For example, a novel is considered unacceptable or inappropriate for elementary school, but is considered acceptable for middle school. And then the word goes out that elementary schools will be directed to withdraw it, but middle schools might have the same document, might have the same book, but would retain it. That's just something off the top of my head. What I'm concerned about is that if we're not doing it across the district, then we're creating inconsistencies in what we consider to be acceptable learning materials, and that's where I see it being problematic.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee Painter. Associate Superintendent Arts, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you, Trustee Painter. Yes, this would apply across the district, but as you've highlighted, it may be level specific. There may be a resource that's appropriate at high school, but not appropriate at elementary school. So it's not K to 12 district wide, but if it was determined through this process that a resource was not appropriate at elementary, that would apply to all elementaries. We wouldn't need 28 requests for reconsideration in order for them to not to be in 28 schools. Having said that, many times not all schools have all the resources, so it may not apply to a school that doesn't have it at the time, but they would not be able to add that resource should it be determined that it's not appropriate through this process. So it would be district-wide, but level dependent. And so the outcome is communicated with the principal, which would then, as senior leaders, we would communicate that with the levels that this applies to, or if it was appropriate to remain, that would be communicated as well.
Thank you, Associate Superintendent Arts. So Trustee Painter, are you suggesting that that communication process would be articulated specifically in a section here? Like that it's committed to that the decision would be communicated by the senior leadership team or by whomever? Is that what you're looking for?
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So there's a clear understanding about what the outcome, how the outcome is addressed.
Got it. Okay, so Associate Superintendent Arts, do you have any suggestions about where it would be most appropriate to include that clarification regarding communication? And again, I don't want to rush you or put you on the spot, but if you have some advice, that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think where Trustee Painter is suggesting as a new 6 would be the appropriate place at the end of the process. So obviously is where I think that would be the case. Just thinking here, if someone didn't appeal to the board, if there was a decision that was made at the district level and no appeal came forward, it would be appropriate there. So I'm just trying to think how that fits. We may not everyone may appeal to the board through this process, but I think at the end is the appropriate place for it to be, wherever that end may be.
Okay. Okay, so let's find the end here. So I think what is now, what is this, 5, 6, 7, 8, it says this concludes and finalizes the request for reconsideration process. The learning resource shall not be subject to further challenge or reviews. Perhaps we put it there. That just confirming that decisions regarding the outcome at any stage will be communicated to schools as appropriate, something like that. And who is going to be in charge of doing that? Is that what you're looking for, Trustee Painter? Okay, so Associate Superintendent Arts, who would be responsible for doing that communication?
Thank you. And through the chair, at the district stage, it would be the chair of the committee, which is outlined there as superintendent or designate. And then if it got to an appeal to the board, it says the superintendent will be the one communicating after that outcome.
Okay. So do we want to say like the superintendent or designate will be responsible for communicating the decision to schools in the district as appropriate. Something like that. Yeah, okay, so let me put that in. Let's put that in the chat so that we can move that forward. Subject to, are you happy with that language? Let me put it in the chat, Trustee Painter, and then just make sure that that is what you are looking for. Okay, so it would read the superintendent or designate will be, sorry, it should be, will be responsible for communicating the decision to the schools in the district as appropriate. Okay. How about we say,
I think that's sufficient. It provides enough scope for the flexibility we've already mentioned, but confirms that there is a final step.
okay. Okay. Oh, yes, Associate Superintendent Arts. Sorry, sometimes you have to wave at me. You're very small. I see.
No problem at all. Lots of people to watch on the meeting. So I just want to clarify though, I've heard two different places where we're placing this. In my mind, this is the new number 6 after number 5, not Roman numeral 9. This would be after between, and then number 6 would become number 7 in all cases where there's a request, the final statement. Is that where you're seeing this going as well?
I'm open to direction. My suggestion was going to be just the end. So at the very end. So when it says this concludes and finalizes the request for reconsideration process. But if you think that that makes it unclear because it connects it too much to the board reconsideration and you think it should be elsewhere, then that makes sense. Give us some advice. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I believe, yeah, if we add it after this concludes, that only refers to the board appeal part. And if we make it as the new number 6 below that, it's at the either the district level or board level, wherever it concludes, that would apply.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Trustees, we don't have a mover and a seconder. So I think what Associate Superintendent Arts is suggesting makes sense. And so it would again be its own standalone. And is everybody clear on where we're at and what this proposed amendment would look like and where it would go? And if so, then again, I'll look to my colleagues for a mover and a seconder. Moving it, Trustee Painter, and a seconder, Trustee Bio. Thank you very much. Okay, any discussion? I'm going to turn to partners first, just to check in with you to see if you have any advice or comments you'd like to share in relation to this amendment. Okay, I don't see any. Trustees, any discussion before I call the question on this amendment? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment with a show of hands? That's unanimous. Okay. I think there's just one more thing, at least certainly subject to my colleagues, that I would like to suggest. That is going back up to page 41 to B43. So this is again describing that what the board will be provided with. My suggestion would be at 3, so at B43. That, or I, that at the end of that sentence, we would just, after the word process, we would say, or that the board requires. Okay, so essentially it would read, any other relevant information that was gathered during the district level process or that the board requires. So just covering off those scenarios where perhaps it gets to the board and there's something missing that the board identifies it needs. We want to kind of make it clear that that is within the board's discretion. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I suggest requests instead of requires. Requires is a value statement someone else is going to be expected to make.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Or that the board requests. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, subject to any other further discussion, would someone like to move that amendment? So it would read, or that the board requests. Trustee Kwan, seconded by Trustee Painter. Checking in again with our partners, if there's anything you would like to offer. Okay, trustees, any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment? And that is unanimous. All right, so any further amendments we want to make to the draft regulation? Okay, not seeing any. So I think we are at the point of perhaps I'll look to my colleagues to potentially approving the regulation as revised. I think would be the appropriate motion. And if the board agrees, then I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by trustee Kwan, seconded by trustee Mbobi. Before I call the question, I want to again just check in one more time with our partners if you have any comments at this point. Okay, all right, trustees, any discussion? So again, we're just voting to then approve the regulation as revised. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
No real questions, just a comment to thank you to for the work that's gone into this and the collaboration from our partners around the table as well, and appreciate it, and I'm glad we've gotten to this point.
Thank you very much, trustee Kwan. Any further discussion before I call the question? All right, hearing none, all those in favor, the show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. And again, thank you, Associate Superintendent Arts. Appreciate it. We got there. Okay, so I'm going to move us along. Just bear with me a second. I want to check in just with staff, just to see if Emma has arrived before I move us on. I don't see Emma.
Through the chair, no, and no one in the waiting room.
Okay, thank you very much for confirming that. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to our operations policy and planning meeting. With this one under D2, there is just there's no recommended motions coming from that meeting, but there is a draft set of minutes for your information only. So next up is our superintendent's report under E1. Superintendent Whitten, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. You'll see on page 56 of the packet my memo for the month of October. Included in my memo on pages 58 and 59 is more information around the Central Middle School lockdown that occurred October 21st, 2024, which also includes the letters that were sent home on that day to the students and families. There's also on page 60 and 61, a memo that has been revised with regards to the upgrades to the boardroom technology. You'll see in the memo that there's a little further information about the prioritization of the work, starting sort of with the removal of the tables and to the carpeting, and then as well as the technology. So just wanted to flesh that out a little bit further. As per my memos, there's information with regards to each of the goals and the activities that I've done in the month. And then lastly, gratitude. Want to provide gratitude to the Representative Advisory Council of Students. We met on October 21st. We were treated to a delicious dinner that was provided by the culinary class at Esquimalt High. And we spent about an hour and a half discussing both second annual wellness fair that is student led, as well as a second annual anti-racism forum, and also conversation around policy 5131.4, which is the substance abuse policy, which is working or being worked through with the policy subcommittee. So that is my memo for the month of October, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Superintendent. Appreciate that. Trustees, any questions in relation to the superintendent's monthly report? Trustee Painter and then Trustee Kwan.
I was just wondering if the superintendent knows if Central Middle School or the district is still participating in a neighborhood committee with the Yates Street shelter opposite them. I have no indication that suggests the person in distress was a resident of the shelter, but it brought to mind that that was an effective tool when my kids were going to Central, and I just wanted to see if it was still in place.
Trustee Painter, Superintendent, you able to answer that question tonight?
I can answer it. Well, I can and I can't. I believe that, well, I have heard that the individual is not part of this, place. However, we do have a meeting now set up on Friday, myself and the principal of Central, to meet with them to discuss any concerns that we have with regards to the area.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
I don't want to jump the gun because I want to move on to the next topic, but if anyone else has anything with regards to Central, I would prefer to keep that in the same conversation if I can. So I will give it a couple minutes to see if there's anyone else.
I don't know, colleagues, anyone else have any other questions regarding that part of the superintendent's report? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, first of all, I really appreciated this coming to ops and again to the board meeting with regards to upgrading the boardroom technology. I guess a question, maybe comment, I don't know, we'll see how it turns out maybe. But I was just wondering about priorities as far as I think we had furniture and carpet kind of as first, and then the audio visual as second. And I kind of just wondered about I think part of the reason that spurred this looking into this was the request for more hybrid meetings with board meetings and that kind of thing, at least from the board's perspective. And so I wondered if the audio visual was is it like a second step to what we're already doing with the OWL, or does it make more sense to look into that before looking into the furniture, just so that we know we have the equipment to be able to host hybrid meetings? So that was, I guess that turned into a question.
Superintendent.
That's a very good question. Thank you, through the chair. I think what we would be looking at is moving our OWL into the room once we remove the tables and understand how flexibly we can move the furniture around. So in our thinking, it would be removing the fixed tables, having flexible tables, and having the OWL we currently have, and see how far that projects. We do have a speaker and the OWL, and that may serve certain flexible seating arrangements. Then we would look at the possibility of extending to another OWL to ensure that we have a hybrid. And we're trying to stage this and not go too far before we know what that room requires. And it's hard when the tables are fixed to actually project what it may look like when they are able to be moved. So it may come hand in hand, but at this point, it's just getting to the place that we can move tables to be flexible and then incorporate the OWL to see how far it goes with both the visual and the audio.
Go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, if I may, that's a really good point. And so I guess really the question that comes out of that is that we don't think that the OWL will be able to accommodate as we are right now with the fixed tables. Is that kind of the reason behind it? Okay.
Okay. And Superintendent, you could, Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Oh, this is a separate question. So if you want to keep going, keep going.
I just wanted to clarify that, Superintendent, your intention is once you have some more clarity about what should come first and the costs associated with things, it's going to come back to the board anyways. Is that correct? So yeah, I see you shaking. So, okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. That'll give trustees another opportunity to feed in terms of the manner in which we want to proceed. Thank you very much, Superintendent. Okay, Trustee Gagnon, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to go and touch back on Central Middle's incident from last week again. Just in regards to how this individual gained access to the school as a whole, and like if we know which door was accessed, whether or not that door was unlocked, why that door may have been unlocked, just that process in how this person got into the school proper.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Superintendent.
Thank you, and through the chair. So this is during the end of the lunch recess, so students are entering back in. They're in their classes to eat their lunch. So it is not common practice to lock all of the doors in schools, and it's often where the doors that are closest to the office are open, but depending on the layout of the school, different doors may be open. Regardless, even when you close doors or lock doors, there's also the opportunity to place doors ajar. That happens often in schools where students are coming and going and finding the most convenient route back into the school. So we have spent time looking at that particular layout of the school and which doors should remain open. We know that there's a active footpath that goes through the front of the school. And so we really need to pay attention to which doors are accessible and which doors aren't. And in speaking with the principal, certainly working with staff to ensure that the doors that are not as visible as the front door for that particular school are locked.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
I certainly appreciate that level, the context. That's great. Thank you so much. My question is actually around the Representative Advisory Council of Students. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on some of the conversation that happened and whether there was any enthusiasm or chance for the students, or I'm trying to find the right word and it's not coming. It's late at night, but do you think that they'd be happy to bring some recommendations to changes to what they've discussed as far as substance abuse? Did you get any level of thoughts on whether they'd be interested in bringing to the board some changes or some recommendations on any of the topics that you discussed?
Thank you. If I may, through the chair. Yes, so lots of enthusiasm. We broke into two groups, and Associate Superintendent Arps and myself led a group each. We talked about the student wellness, and the student who led that last year is also part of this group this year. So we have very fortunate to have this person working again on that area and looking for ways to alter it for lessons learned and also to expand it. It was a very successful day. And so we have several students who have joined us this year who are interested in doing that. Similarly, for the Anti-Racism Forum, that was 2 years ago. Again, a large group of students from that group that want to be part of that and co-lead it. And lastly, with the substance abuse or substance use policy, yes, we had quite a lively conversation from the students on their perspective, which included the educational points that need to be brought into regulation policy. Their experiences is coming through secondary school and where they learned about things and perhaps where they could learn more about things and some of the topics that they wish they may have learned about. And perhaps, in all honesty, some of the areas that, depending on the class or the school that they attended, some felt they had lots and some felt they could have had more. So I think they each got a copy of the policy and the regulation and of the draft policy and draft regulation. And a commitment was to bring that forward to the next meeting in November so they could discuss it further.
Trustee Kwan, you had a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. That sounds amazing. And I'm glad that there's such an enthusiasm for that discussion and that it will continue. I wondered, is there any, is there a chance to bring, VHA or some other type of experts in to kind of facilitate perhaps some of the discussions that these students are having?
Superintendent, whenever you're ready.
With regards to them coming to a student representative meeting? We can always look at that. We have a pretty big agenda each time, and so we want to follow along what they're interested in, and what we've tried to do is identify who's interested in each of the 3 areas so that maybe we have a smaller working group to look at that. And then in that case, we certainly could, unless the whole group wanted to have that. We have divided it up and people next month we'll articulate which area they're most interested in, and then we can go a bit deeper.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, folks, any other questions in relation to the superintendent's monthly report? And if there aren't any further questions, then I will ask my colleagues to move a motion to accept the superintendent's monthly report. Thank you, trustee Kwan, and a seconder. Thank you, trustee Gagnon. All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the superintendent's monthly report? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, trustees. Okay, next item under B is the 2024-2025 elementary school plans. There is a recommended motion to approve the 2024-2025 elementary school plans. Again, superintendent, this is your item. Feel free whenever you're ready.
Thank you. The memo is on page 62 and it does outline the requirements of the school app. It also shares the process that we went through last year as we met with principals and vice principals. We looked at it as a continuous improvement cycle. So we started in the summer and fall, identifying which actions will make the biggest impact. We continued through the winter and into the spring around implementing the actions and then assessing the actions to determine if they created a positive change or any change. And just that continual looking at, did what we want to do make a difference? And if it did, do we continue that? If it didn't, what do we do differently? And how do we continue to look at improvement? This was with, excuse me, all levels, so elementary, middle, and secondary. For this month, we are bringing the elementary school plans, and they're accessible through the memo, which hopefully you can see were tabs so you can go to the schools. In the November board meeting, there will be the middle school plans that come, so you'll get 10 at that point, and then 8 in December through the secondary school plan. So we broke it up by level to make it a little bit more consumable, but certainly you have the 28 elementaries that have come to you through this memo.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, I'm gonna open the floor to some discussion, questions, etc. First, I'm gonna turn to our partners. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions in relation to the school plans in the pack-up. Yeah, President Hutchins, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll start by begin by stating VCPAC's preferred recommendation for tonight, and then I'll provide some context to explain why. So VCPAC would suggest that the 28 elementary school growth plans be deferred by the board for consideration at a future meeting. And there's two broad reasons for that. Through our VCPAC's parent engagement opportunity that we did in June and July, we heard sort of three broad areas of concern from the parent community. One is regarding student safety, the second one is regarding equity, and the third is regarding communication with parents and students. And those themes of safety, equity, and communication are certainly reflected in this agenda. The presentation that we didn't get to see tonight by Sundance Bank talked about both communication and equity, and certainly the memo on Central speaks to safety, and certainly at the VCPAC level, we heard a lot about that on communication. And so when we think about the 28 school growth plans that are on the agenda tonight, some of them are excellent, some of them are pretty good, and some of them are okay. But from a communication point of view, the VCPAC exec reviewed all 28 to get a sense of how parents and how parent advisory councils had been consulted. And when we reviewed the 28, we could only find 4 examples of where PACs were in support of the goals within the plan. Craig Flower, Doncaster, Tillicum, and Torquay expressed the PAC had reviewed and supported the goals within the school growth plan. in those 4 instances, there was no indication that the actual document had been presented to the PAC, just that there was support for the broad goal. But within each plan, of course, there's targets, there's indicators, and then there's resources needed. And so thinking about how parents are really asking for more communication from the district, it strikes the VC PAC that these documents might be an excellent tool to better engage parents on the goals, the objectives, the measures, and the resources that administration, the school board is prioritizing. And so the first thing that VC PAC would strongly suggest is that before the board approves the elementary school growth plans, is that the board asks that they be sent back to school principals to bring to the PACs for discussion, for questions, for dialogue, for input. Certainly the PACs don't have the ability to approve, but it'd be a great opportunity just to talk about what's going on. And then once that's done, to note that in each plan and then bring it back up to the board for approval. The second piece that VC PAC has really looked at is how each of the 28 documents speaks to safety and speaks to equity. And one way to do that is by looking at the metrics or the measures that are kind of outlined in the plans. And that's in each of the documents, that's the middle column. And when we did that, we found that there was only 7 of the 28 that spoke to incidents. 3 of the 7 spoke to both student to student and student to teacher instances being tracked and being measured and being meaningful in tracking progress against goals. 1 only spoke to students, and 3 were unclear on what they were tracking. They just said they were tracking instances more generally. And of course, the other 21 were silent on that. And that the differing approach on metrics between the excuse me, between the 28 is, I think, an opportunity for, and VC PAC thinks is an opportunity for improvement. Excuse me. So for example, if the board slowed down the process just a little bit and asked staff and school administrators to see if there's any common metrics that might be used that could be used between schools. So for example, I'll pick on 3 schools just of note. Macaulay Elementary has metrics for student to student and student to teacher instances. George J has just for student incidents, student to student, and Quadra Elementary doesn't speak to that at all. But those schools are very similar in that all 3 are priority schools and all 3 are dual stream. And so VC PAC would really encourage the board to think about seeing if there's any common objectives or common measures that could be integrated into all 28 school plans, not just in this year, but in year over year. And then that way, if schools are in where it makes sense, having a common measure or a common objective, as the board looks at these plans year over year, they can help be informed on progress against those objectives, instead of having each of the 28 schools looking at something different and then not be able to roll up any of the data that might feed into the board's common policies. And so I'll pause there because I've taken up a lot of the time, but at the highest level, great documents, but a really great opportunity for further engagement with schools and with the parent community. So strongly recommend that they go to each PAC for review and discussion first. And secondly, that a little bit of time's taken to see if there's any common measures that might be applicable across all plans. And maybe that's something for the equity committee to consider, as well as through the measurement work they're doing on some of these similar things. And then once that work's done, the plans could come back to the board for approval, perhaps later this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Hutchins. Appreciate your comments. Gonna just turn to the superintendent initially. Superintendent, what is your understanding in terms of process? So the process employed at the school level when putting together the school plans. It sounds like maybe there's some variation from school to school, and perhaps in some instances, not all PACs have been engaged as fully in this process, or perhaps at all. What is your understanding?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So my understanding would be that principals most likely would be sharing the goals with PACs. When that happens though is different depending on the principal and depending on the school. So it may be toward the end of one school year or the beginning of another. Usually they're conversing on their goals throughout the year, but again, there isn't a expectation that in 1 month they're going to share these with their PACs. And so we have schools that have new principals that join in September. They may be coming in with the plan and looking at it, getting themselves acquainted. And then through an October, November, December, as it is a continuous improvement cycle, that they may be bringing these goals to both staff and PAC through those processes. So it is a living document. It is one that we start and continue throughout the year and assess as we move forward, as I had mentioned earlier in the memo. But it is an expectation that principals are working with PACs around their goals, but when and how they share them and how they articulate them may differ from school to school.
Thank you, Superintendent. So is it fair to say that, we're not exactly sure whether or not all schools have had the opportunity to consult with their PACs in relation to the plans before the board tonight?
I think that would be fair. I think that we have, as principals, as I mentioned, coming into a new school and looking at the plan and looking at the data and having discussions with staff. They may not have had an opportunity yet by a PAC meeting to bring this forward. But again, some of these have been discussed with the PAC the previous year. And this is now moving this goal forward to the next year. So it's hard because there is a stop and start to a school year and there's ongoing and continuous improvement in a plan like this. So I think they're both at play. What we would want to ensure is that principals, when they're meeting with PACs during the month, they're looking at their goals and they're sharing their work toward the goal.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. I believe President Hutchins, you might have had your hand up again. If that's right, then feel free. And then following that, Trustee Kwan.
Thank you for noticing. Through you, Chair. I neglected to mention in my introductory remarks that when VCPAC was reviewing the agenda, it went out to its network, and I also went out to my individual PAC's network as well, and I asked the question: has anybody heard of a school growth plan? And the answer was no. And so I suspect what's happening and is that the goals at the goal level, and that's what I spoke about at the four schools where for the school growth plans did document that they'd gone to the PAC and gotten support for the goals. Probably the term school growth plan wasn't used in those instances, and the goal indeed was brought forward, or goals if there was multiple goals, but I suspect amongst the parent community, there isn't an understanding about what school growth plans are, that they're mandated under the School Act, that they're produced every year, that they go to the board for approval, and that they're there as a resource for PACs.
Thank you, President Hutchins. Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, my question was simply, are all of the school plans posted on their website? I know there's plenty of opportunities, and I think every school has its own website now that measures it's a district kind of website, but for each school, and wondered if the plans are on there and if they're consistently in the same place, and if parents, can find them regardless of what school they're going to, they know where to go.
Superintendent?
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you, Trustee Kwan. They will be, for these ones, elementary would be posted as early as tomorrow. So after this meeting, and then middle will come up after that, and secondary. So there are, again, staged opportunities for principals to bring this forward to PAC. So at this point, it came to the board first as a means of reporting, but the conversation should occur all year. The public posting of it comes up after it comes to the board meeting.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Peter? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Are you not done?
if
Go
No,
ahead.
sorry, I forgot, so the, plans are in the same place. We tried to make sure it was consistently presented for each, school, so people should not be looking too far to find them.
Thank you, Superintendent. President Roberts, I'm not sure if I missed your hand before, so my apologies. Trustee Painter, would you mind just holding while I, thank you. So, yeah, President Roberts, go ahead.
Just for clarity, I'm the vice president, not the president.
Thank you. No, you're right. I'm
Yes,
so
I
sorry.
guess.
Vice President Roberts,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
for
you.
correcting me.
I just wanted to offer that as a school principal, I'm happy to share the process that we go through and that we've gone through and that we continue to go through in developing our school growth plan. And I know it's just one school, but I do know that from the conversation and work we do in middle school and in conversation with other colleagues that it's, it varies school to school depending on your school culture and where you're at in your principalship and so forth. But I'm happy to share the process that we've gone through, just if it helps the board for that understanding and a picture of what it looks like in school.
Sure, that would be much appreciated. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Great. So this is my third year at Glanford, and when I came in, they were right at the place, the staff was right at the place of looking at creating a whole new school goal. And so in that process, we sort of mapped out various themes, questions, wonders, ideas. What are we noticing? What are we noticing with students? What are the needs? What are the strengths? So there was a lot of brainstorming through staff meetings, team leaders, and also through staff committee. So you're looking at what are the different structures within the school that you can sort of take it from big picture and then have smaller groups working on the finer details, as I'm sure you know in your work. And then from there, we really landed on, and at that time, especially the new reporting order was coming in. So we really wanted to go deeper and focus intentionally on our assessment practice. And so with that, the main idea of assessment, the overriding theme. And then from that place, we then started really fleshing out what was it that we wanted to know, what were we noticing with our students. And we used the spirals of inquiry process, pulled pieces of that and looked at what are we noticing from our students, what are we noticing with our practice, and what were the hunches and wonders that we had with our students and how they were engaging and how they viewed their interactions and relationship with assessment, really. And then from there, we did that survey with the whole staff and took that information. We did some noticings of students and the type of assessment practice that we were using and how it fit or didn't fit, to be honest, with the new reporting order. And then we did a big wordsmithing activity with team leaders. From there, we brought it back to staff. I brought it to a PAC meeting just to review where we were at, what we were thinking about, if they had any questions. And then we drilled down and got our actual question. Our actual goal focus. That focuses both on students, interaction, relationship, ongoing feedback and clarity for students, but also how that impacts students and also how it builds relationship clarity with staff. Once again, it came back to our PAC, especially because the reporting order was just coming out. And as we know, I know that I've been a part of a few conversations just with the changes to the language, the proficiency language. So what did we have to equip parents with understanding? And then, of course, they had a lot of questions. So, it did come up a number of times through PAC meetings because it was so relevant in the communicating of student learning that they were experiencing. I do know that in conversation with colleagues that it is common that sometimes you may not be explicitly bringing it, but you are often discussing because the decisions that PAC make to support the initiatives that you have in school through their funds sometimes are tied directly to that school goal. If you're focusing on, let's say, athletic participation and increased engagement for physical wellness, those decisions that conversation will come to PAC, because how they support extracurricular physical health and wellness will tie back to that goal. So can't speak for everybody, but that is a process that is, I would suggest, quite common, just flexes a little bit within school to school.
Thank you, Vice President Roberts. Appreciate you walking us through what your practice is at your school. Okay. I'm wondering, so I certainly don't want the board, the timeline, right, that we've applied to our decision-making process and our agenda planning to be dictating or in some way influencing how quickly folks feel they have to get the plans to the board. Obviously, there is a lot of opportunity for school communities, including, administrators and staff and parents to collaborate and really community build as they build their plan for the year. I'm also mindful that from a board perspective, there is a number of things around the strategic plan and wanting to have some consistency. So let's continue the dialogue. I'll go back to Trustee Painter, who so patiently waited, and then we'll go from there. Trustee Painter, whenever you're ready.
And to be clear, I'm always happy to defer to our partners. I learned so much more from people who actually know what they're talking about. I was just going to offer that obviously things change over the years, but in the time when I was on a PAC in elementary school, there was actually a formal process for signing off for parents as representatives of their PAC to sign off on school plans. And it occurs to me that if this is something that we need to articulate, not necessarily step by step, but to explain more generally to parents about how they can engage or get feedback on, etc. It might be worth development of a policy on that matter, just more broadly about how PACs can engage with the board or with their school administration and potentially with the board.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Okay, so that leaves us though with some plans where there have been some concerns raised just in terms of ensuring that there has been an opportunity for PACs to feed in. I feel like we might be preemptively looking to approve something that in fact all the sort of school community hasn't necessarily in every case had an opportunity to feed in. I don't think there's any reason to rush the process if that is the case, and perhaps we want to look to just providing some sort of direction to the superintendent to sort of take these back in light of what we're hearing. So I've heard a few things. One, I've heard that there is variation, right? And so that variation is great. And but perhaps we do want to look at, some standardization so that there is some consistencies from school to school aligned with the board's strategic plan. There is an opportunity if we're going to be doing this work for us to, make it quite useful in terms of the ongoing setting of common objectives and measures so that we can, as a district, larger district community, track sort of how we're doing against the commitments in the board strategic plan. And then I'm also hearing that there might need to be a proactive reach out in some cases to ensure that PACs, who again are new, are often volunteers, right? Don't necessarily have any idea about sort of what the PAC does, what the rules are that govern the PAC, and how they would even start to go about interacting with their school administrators. So I think, again, this is another opportunity if we sort of pause and don't rush it to kind of, again, create those opportunities to have those communications and create those relationships. And then the other thing I'm hearing is that, again, perhaps we want to look at, again, giving the superintendent to kind of lead some identification of common objectives and measures so that those can be tracked from school to school. Obviously, we want to continue to have some space for individuality at school levels, and because every school is unique and different, but some common objectives may not hurt. So those are all the things I've heard this evening. Perhaps based on that, we want to give some direction to the superintendent and not move forward with approving the plans tonight. That direction could look like directing the superintendent to just work with the principal of each of the elementary schools to ensure that there's a school plan. The school plans presented to each of the respective school parent advisory councils, along with a request for PAC input. So a proactive request, if it hasn't already been made, to identify and place, and then ensure that there's common objectives and measures in place and tracked throughout the school year in alignment with the board's strategic plan, and then to bring that back to the board. So to bring back any of the revised plans to the board once that work is done. Looking for some feedback from colleagues, and then perhaps I can suggest a motion. Or should I put a motion in the chat so that you can then mull it over? Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. I wonder, I think we're still establishing process. And so, maybe some of this is actually just adjusting out what we want the process to be. It sounds like perhaps because the school plans, they wanted them in quite early, especially for elementary, to the board, that chance for parent advisory committee feedback wasn't there yet. And if the board wants to see that, then perhaps we maybe move that process where we approve school plans to further in the year. So just some thoughts there as well.
Thank you. No, that's a great point. And I think we are just, I think, the previous board, I think we are evolving as well in terms of our own expectations as a board about kind of, that these plans, A, need to come forward, right? And then B, wanting to make sure that they come forward in a good way that aligns best with what schools are needing, so that to allow for that space and collaboration time. So I've thrown something into the chat. You can let me know what your thoughts are. Trustee Kwan, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and sorry, just quickly add, I think the takeaway here is that we are still working on the process. So the fact that maybe PACs haven't seen it, is not, it's just the way the process works, and we haven't actually worked that out yet. So, each school is looking at it a bit differently. And I think, if we wanted a certain way, then it's kind of up to the board to determine the process that we wanted, especially if they're coming to us. So, just putting it out there that, it's difficult for schools to know what we want if we're not communicating that out.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and so we need to kind of evolve and make sure we create some clarity and create some space rather than rushing things. And again, that continuous improvement cycle applies to us as well. So perhaps, again, this gives a sort of a framework for, making sure that if we're going to give some direction on what we want to kind of see moving forward in terms of process and so on, that we're clear with the superintendent kind of what it is we're looking for. It says that, again, the usual preamble would direct the superintendent to work with the principal of each elementary school in the school district to ensure that, 1, the school plan is presented to each respective school parent advisory council PAC, along with a request for PAC input. 2, to identify and then ensure there are common objectives and measures in place and tracked throughout the 2024-25 school year in alignment with the board's strategic plan. So that's sort of trying to create some commonality and just further develop that kind of commonality. So there's some consistency from school to school as it relates to the board's strategic plan. And then further, upon completion of this work, to present the revised elementary school plans to the board. So again, not providing any date because I think the work will take the time it takes, and especially if there is differing kind of each school is kind of at a different place, some of whom might have already done this and some of whom may not have had an opportunity yet to do it, or did it at a different time of year with a different pack, right? So yeah, it's there. And if somebody is interested and thinks it's a good idea, feel free to move and second it. Trustee Quinn, go ahead.
Oh, just for the sake of discussion, I'd like to move it so that there is discussion, I can hear it.
Yeah, sounds good. Moved by Trustee Kwan, seconded by Trustee Gagnon. Okay, I'm going to open the floor first to our partners. President Howe, go ahead.
Thanks. Being involved in the school growth plan isn't something that teachers particularly enjoy. It sounds like Ms. Roberts' school had a great process, but teachers already have a plan typically, and it's dictated by the curriculum, it's dictated by the ministry, it's dictated by, you know, the responsibilities of teachers. And so I guess I'm concerned that particularly for around number 2, that if a school has already done this work, for example, my school, South Park, spent several staff meetings on this last year, very reluctantly. we had to give a lot of staff meeting time to this work, and so we did because we were instructed to. But I would be very worried that the school staff would have to then assign further staff meetings to this work that's already been done. So that's my concern. I know that yeah, the growth plan has always been controversial with teachers, and so if we're looking at changing it to identify common objectives and measures, I'm worried.
Thank you, President Howe. Yeah, and just to be clear, so that particular section of the motion number 2 is really about ensuring that each of the plans is linked to the board strategic plan. And so that there's some common alignment across the district, because obviously each school is unique and has its specific objectives and areas of growth that they identify. But there is also the board strategic plan, and we want to sort of be able to speak to the way that each school is aligning itself and its operations behind the priorities set by the board through the strategic plan. This does not envision, and again, like teachers spending more time. I think that would be down to the school community to decide, you know, who needs to be engaged beyond PACs. I think what we've heard tonight is that perhaps not all PACs have had the opportunity to input. And I guess the only other thing I would add is that, you know, this is required by the School Act. So it's not, you know, we're not making it up as we go, but what goes in them, that's kind of, again, like that's like the area for discussion. And so, yeah, how we get there is important, right? Because we know that everybody is working really hard, and you don't want to be taken away from your hard work in the classroom, and especially not if you feel like it's a bureaucratic piece. So point made, and certainly appreciate you highlighting that for the board. We don't want to lose sight of that. I feel like I've lost track of the speakers list. I'm sorry. I just wanted to turn to our partners first and give them an opportunity, and then I'll return to trustees. President Hutchins, I think you were next in line. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you very much, trustees, for moving and seconding the motion that's on the table. VCPAC would certainly support the motion, and I think it largely represents the comments I've already made. 2 other points of note: one building on President Howe's comments, and then another just speaking to the roles of VCPAC and the respective PACs. I would hope that as the equity ad hoc committee that does its work, as the board later on in this meeting debates the resolution or the motion that's been brought forward under new business, and then as administrators start to look at the different measures and metrics in the school growth plans, that that common themes would emerge, and it might become apparent what things are already being tracked. For example, the student teacher instances through Form 1s that a number of folks identified already in their school growth plans. That might be an example of data that is being asked for across multiple venues that could be rolled up. Or there might be other measures that that we haven't thought of yet. That, wow, I know few schools are doing that, and we haven't really thought about that, but tracking it collectively across the district might make a lot of sense. So I think it's the resolution will help to drive some really positive dialogue and discussion. And on that second point, the boards of all people are very well aware of funding constraints that all school districts are under. And that's not unique to the school board, but also seen by PACs. And certainly what we see at the VC PAC level is some PACs moving to in their role to shift to be a PAC that may be primarily focused on fundraising to help make up for various shortfalls in funding. And in focusing on funding and fundraising, less space is made for other important issues. And so by putting this back in front of the parent community and asking for input and feedback, it's helping broaden the voices that parents might have and make sure that all parents who may want to comment, may want to have a voice, but may not want to be part of fundraising, have the opportunity to get involved in their communities. And so from an equity point of view, this helps round out PACs as well. So just wanted to make those 2 points and very much in support of the motion.
Thank you, President Hutchins. Okay, I'm gonna, subject to any further comments from partners, I'm going to turn to Trustee Kwan and then Trustee Painter. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess it was more of a suggestion and thoughts around what my colleagues think with regards to this motion. I think there's definitely space to be able to go back to PACs and get some feedback and bring it back to the board. With regards to number 2, I 100% agree that can happen. But in light of, some of the comments that have happened and some of the work that's already gone into this, and knowing it is a continuous improvement cycle, I wonder if number 2 would be more would basically go towards the school plans and developing the further next year, and actually putting this as a little bit more direction towards school plans for the following year. Just a thought. I wasn't sure what colleagues and partners thought of that, but it occurred to me.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. I don't know what others' views are. My own view is that this is the time to start to, like, I don't want to approve something that hasn't gone to all the PACs. Like, they're a major partner along with, all the other partners around the table. And if there hasn't been an opportunity to, to have that dialogue with PACs, I think it's a missed opportunity. I wouldn't want to wait till next year to do, but that's just me.
Sorry if I may, Chair. I meant just specifically number 2 for next year. The others I think would need to happen right now.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so Trustee Painter, you're next up. Go ahead. Sorry, you're
Sorry, I'll pass.
you don't wish to speak anywhere? Okay, no, that's fine. You're not obliged. Okay. Okay, so going back to Trustee Kwan's query about 2. So again, like, the wording was again just meant to ensure that there was again an opportunity to look at what the board's strategic plan priorities are, and to just make sure there's some alignment in all of the school plans, right? Again, we want to create that space for that unique perspective of the school community to come through, but I feel like, to the extent that there isn't a commonality around the board's priorities, and there may perhaps not alignment when it comes to objectives and measures, that again, we look to the superintendent to kind of lead that discussion with our school communities to see, what their thoughts are on that. And perhaps there are, there is already a clear view. I don't know. Superintendent, did you want to weigh in at any point? Feel free whenever you would like. What are your thoughts onto the idea that we identify and then ensure there's common objectives and measures in alignment with the board strategic plan?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. When we're working with principals, we are looking at it through the lens of the board strategic plan. So they're identifying the school goals based on the board's plans and the board strategy. I think when we're looking at trying to identify common objectives and measures, it is within each school to look at what makes sense in their context. And so I would find it challenging to come up with a common objective and a measure other than things that we know are objective. And so where we perhaps differ is in the subjectiveness of some of the measures, data, and evidence. I think if we're looking at common objectives with regards to literacy assessment, well, that would be one that we could probably come up with. But if we're looking at some of the other areas, I really would want the school to weigh in and suggest what is important to them in consultation and collaboration with the staff and the PAC. But they should really have voice into that. It is the school's work that looks at how the work in their building aligns with the board strategic plan.
No, thanks, Superintendent. So how would you suggest then, if we're looking to identify some common objectives and measures, right? And to ensure that each of the plans align with the priorities in the board strategic plan, how would you suggest that is done?
I think that would take longer than this evening to look at. I think when, again, we're talking elementary, middle, and secondary, so those are very diverse learning environments. Tonight, we're talking about elementary, but I wouldn't want to lose sight that soon we'll see the middle, and after that, we'll see the secondary. Common objectives and measures, there are things that we look at all the time with regards to attendance, achievement, attachment. Those are things that schools use to track to track students. Those are common objectives and measures. Going further than that this evening, I think would do injustice to the amount of evidence that we have at school level. So I would want to put a little more thought into that in order to come up with common objectives and measures that are across 28 elementary or across 10 middle or across 8 secondary.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I'm really glad that you raised that, because, those are great examples of, where the conversation could potentially go. The motion does not envision or prejudge, but only kind of directs that conversation and that collaboration with schools occurs so that we can, where appropriate, as you say, based on each level's unique setting and learning needs and environments where we identify common objectives and measures. And again, like, it may be that we come back to, again, provincial data releases, right? And those being the common measures and objectives. We see that across all school districts, and there's certainly a ministry, expectation that each school district is paying attention to those common measures and objectives and measures in terms of student achievement and well-being and so on through those provincial data sets. So that's obviously a great example. But again, the motion doesn't prejudge, but rather just direct that collaborative work occur. Okay, so thank you very much again, Superintendent. Appreciate that insight. Colleagues, looking to you now, I suppose, for some direction about how you would like to proceed. We've got a motion on the floor. And do we have any further discussion, or would anybody like to move an amendment? I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice, so bear with me. Trustee Kwan, you had a thought? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think if I were to look for an amendment at all, and again, going back to the theme that, the plans have already, been looked at, and there's been numerous staff meetings dedicated to them. I would again look number 2 to be for the 2025-26 school year. Just because I think that I think there's continuous improvement. There's always going to be, a better way to do this. And I also I'm a firm believer in if we're going to give guidance or what we'd like to see, it should be done before the process. It's I think in education we always see that we want those instructions. We want any kind of guidelines to be given before the work is done. So my suggestion would be to amend this to have it go back to the PACs like immediately for this year, but then the common objectives and measures tracked through the 2025-26 school year in alignment with the board's strategic plan. Just because I think there's an opportunity there for it to start off in a good way from the beginning of the school year next year.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. So again, the amendment for everybody's benefit is to change 2024-2025 to 2025-2026. And is there a seconder?
You're muted, Chair.
Sorry, Trustee Painter. Were you seconding or did you have a question? You're seconding. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor to discussion. I'm going to start with our partners first, and then I'll go to trustees. President Hutchins, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to comment. Just one thought that stands out with respect to this amendment, and that's the iterative or living document type nature that these school growth plans have. And if it's the intent to have them in place for the 2025-2026 school year, it would be wonderful if the board was able to ensure that by some point, perhaps by late winter or the spring, whenever the 2025-2026 school plans start being developed by principals, that the common objectives and the common measures are in place in advance of needing to start work on next year's plans. So the work would need to happen this year on common objectives and measures to be ready for next year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, President Hutchins. I think just to clarify with Trustee Kwan and who moved it, your intention is to have the work to identify common objectives and measures be done this year, and then the tracking of whatever those are to come into effect for 2025-2026. Is that right? Okay. No, thanks for the clarification. All right, just again, turning to our partners, if there's any other comments or thoughts that they would like the board to consider before I turn to trustees. Okay. Trustees, sorry, I think Trustee Painter, you had your hand up first, I believe. Go ahead.
I just wanted to offer up that for me, the common objectives and measures wouldn't be intended to basically eliminate any flexibility. That school plans, their schools would still have the capacity to identify which objectives they were looking for. But once an objective has been identified, that we would be relying on a common set of measures that would give us the capacity to understand the relationship between schools, the effectiveness of different initiatives, et cetera, to compare and contrast effectively. And I think that a good first step would be to evaluate the objectives and measures that are in place in the current year's plans, and once they're solid, and start to do some lumping and splitting that way to get a better understanding of the visions that the school communities have for what's important and how to track it. I think that could be really insightful.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Colleagues, any other thoughts in relation to, again, to the amendment? We're just looking at the amendment right now. Okay, so does anybody have any other questions before I call the question? All right, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the amendment with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Okay. Okay, so we've got a motion as amended. So again, just a reminder, the motion would be amended to change 2024-25 to 2025-26 in terms of implementing that tracking bit. Any further discussion, trustees, before I call the question? Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm gonna call the question. All those in favor of the motion as amended, the amended motion? And that is unanimous. Okay, thank you very much, trustees, or to our partners. Thank you as well for your comments, and to our staff helping us get there. Okay, so I want to move us along in our pack-up. We are now at equity ad hoc terms of reference. There's a recommended motion. I'm going to turn to Associate Superintendent Arts, who I believe is supporting that particular ad hoc committee, or whomever is best placed to present the revised terms of reference. Great. Associate Superintendent Arts, go ahead.
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, in your backup on page 64 and 65 are the updated terms of reference. The process is outlined in the memo. Changes are there in red. Happy to answer questions or clarification if anyone has any.
Thank you very much, Associate Superintendent. So again, would you just remind everyone where in the pack-up so that they can go to that page and just follow along?
Page 64 and 65 in the backup.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so folks, everything that's been suggested is in red on page 64 and 65 in the pack-up. Again, I'm going to first turn to our partners to see if you have any thoughts or comments that you would like to share in relation to the recommended revisions to the Equity Ad Hoc Committee's terms of reference. President Hutchins, go ahead.
Would it be all right if I asked a question to you, Chair?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it the Equity Ad Hoc Committee's intent to further review these terms of reference in relation to the board's resolution that was sent to the Equity Ad Hoc Committee from October of this year? And these are the amendments that were agreed to back in May, or do these amendments both encompass the discussion from last year as well as the Equity Ad Hoc Committee's direction from October?
Thank you very much. No, good question. Associate Superintendent Arts, would you mind just clarifying where that is in terms of this particular iteration and these recommendations?
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, yes, this was looked at both last May as well as this October, where the board's motion was part of our meeting when we took a look at updating the terms of reference.
Thank you, Associate Superintendent Arts. Did you have a follow-up, President Hutchins, before I move on?
Thank you. Not at this time. I might later, but not right now.
Okay. Just to be clear in terms of process, so what I do when we're looking at a recommended motion is I first go to partners to offer you an opportunity to speak. Then I'll go to trustees, and so there won't be another opportunity before after I move to trustees. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts that partners want to share before I move to trustees? Okay. Okay, so trustees. We've got a recommended motion and a revised terms of reference. Any other thoughts regarding those recommendations? And again, I also want to just acknowledge that the chair of the committee is here as well this evening, Trustee Mabobi. Thank you so much. Okay, Trustee Painter, kick us off.
I touched on this previously, but now that I'm looking at the final language, I just want to confirm that the leadership of the four houses has affirmed, like positively confirmed, that this is their desired method of engagement.
Thank you, trustee Painter. Associate Superintendent Arts, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, trustee Painter, for the question. Yes, that is correct. And it is consistent with the language in other terms of reference as well.
Associate Superintendent Arts, would you walk us through the specific sections in the terms of reference that address that the committee feels address the board's direction by motion?
Thank you. Through the chair, under the deliverables, there were some sections added, policy recommendations. So we are going to be looking at policies that were directly part of the board motion. Evaluation of programming is another area that we discussed in relation to that. Also up in the purpose, we expanded equitable opportunities to be more specific to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, JEDI for short. So that all of those areas were there. Those are some of the areas that related to the motion, as well as the conversation just of the committee as a whole. And I welcome trustee Mabobi to add if there's anything that she would like as well. Or
Thank
trustee
you.
David, who was also there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay. And again, to my colleagues, gratitude for your representation of the board on this ad hoc committee. Trustee Mabobi is chair and trustee David is another representative from on behalf of the board. If you have anything you would like to share in relation to the recommendations, please feel free. Okay. Yeah, trustee Mabobi, did you have anything you wanted to share? Feel
I
free.
was going to say, I believe Associate Superintendent Arts did a fantastic job summarizing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So if there isn't any further discussion, I'm going to look to trustees to move the recommended motion, which is to accept the revised terms of reference. Thank you, trustee Mabobi. I'm looking for a seconder. Thank you, trustee Gagnon. Okay. Any discussion? Yeah, trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, perhaps someone from the meeting can elaborate on any discussion that happened around the motion from the board for more data, that kind of thing, whether there was discussion and whether that they thought that should be included in the terms of reference.
Thank you, trustee Kwan. Yeah, Associate Superintendent, do you want to kick us off? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, when we looked at the motion, which is a large part of what we did in our meeting, we as a group decided we're going to look at the policies first. And so that's what our next meeting agenda is for coming up here next week to look at that. And then when we're finished that, then we'll move on to the other sections. As we know, there were a number of sections to the motion, and we really wanted to chunk that down into manageable parts. So the first thing we're looking at is the policy review.
Thank you, Associate Superintendent. So just to clarify, like, if the committee thinks that there's further revisions that should be made to the terms of reference, then that can come forward to the board at any time. But is there anything in particular that folks are concerned is not reflected in the terms of reference? And if there is, then now's the time to raise it so that we can make sure it goes back to the committee with the appropriate board direction if that is needed. Okay, not seeing any hands, so I'm going to move us forward. Does anybody else have any comments or thoughts they would like to share, trustees, about the revised terms of reference? So I'm thinking that in terms of evaluation of programming and the distribution of financial resources, providing budget recommendations to the board annually by February, human resource allocations, support for marginalized communities who face systemic barriers, that those deliverables can be read broadly to encompass specifically some of that board direction around data. and I'm assuming that that was the outcome of the discussion at the committee level, that you didn't feel like there needed to be a specific bullet under deliverables related to that point around data. You felt like it could be encompassed by the more general statements. Yeah, okay. I see a thumbs up from Associate Superintendent Arts. Thank you for that confirmation. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Late to the party, but just wanted to weigh in on the kind of the JEDI point and justice, equity, diversity, and inclusive policies. I was wondering if the word accessible is something that we could add in there. It's not explicitly said there, but is something I think could be considered. I don't know if that's something that I need to move a potential amendment for, but yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome to. So it would, you're suggesting that after, and rather be inclusive and accessible, or accessible, inclusive and accessible. Okay. Yeah. Are you wanting to move that then?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just looking for a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Mabobi. Okay, so just to review, under purpose, the highlighted or the text in red, it would be justice, equity, diversity, inclusive and accessible policies, practices, and culture. Any discussion? I should pause. This is an amendment, so I will just again provide an opportunity for our partners. If you do have any thoughts about that, feel free to share those. Okay, trustees, any discussion before I call the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment? And that is unanimous. All right. Any further amendments in relation to this terms of reference? Okay. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to assume we are then ready for me to call the question. Just turning to our staff, can you please remind me who, whether there was in fact a mover and a seconder? I believe there was, but would you just remind me? Yeah, go ahead, Associate Superintendent.
Yes, Trustee Mabobi and Trustee Gagnon.
Great, perfect. Thank you. Okay. All right, I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor of the revised terms of reference? Okay, that's unanimous. All right, thank you, everybody, and thanks everybody on the committee, trustees, partners, staff alike, for your work to revise that and bring that forward to the board. Okay, so we are now moving along to our next items on our agenda this evening. We are at trustee questions. So this, again, trustees, is an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have. And I will direct those questions. Either I will answer them if I can, and if not, I will direct them to the appropriate staff person. So, any trustee questions this evening? Okay. I don't see any, so I'm going to move us along again in our agenda. We are now at Secretary Treasurer's report under E2. Secretary Treasurer's monthly report under A is first. Secretary Treasurer Stride, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. As included in the agenda package, you can see the some of the activities that I've engaged in since the last board meeting on September 23rd. There is a recommended motion, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. All right, trustees, any questions in relation to the Secretary Treasurer's monthly report? Okay, seeing none, we do have a recommended motion to receive the Secretary Treasurer's monthly report. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Trustee David. And a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of receiving the Secretary Treasurer's monthly report? And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, so we are now at E2B, the poll vote results. Secretary Treasurer, was there anything that you wanted to highlight from the results?
Thank you, Chair. Just highlighting that we did do the third reading of the Caledonia Gas Distribution Disposal Right-of-Way of Real Property Bylaw 25-01 by poll vote. And as you can see in the memo that's included in the agenda package, that the third reading was passed and adopted on October 3rd.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Any questions in relation to the poll vote results before I move us on? Okay. So next we have our 2024-2025 enrollment update. And again, Secretary Treasurer, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I just will preface this one in saying that it should have been in the ops agenda, so we could have had some more discussion on this. So we've included it here so that it's still provided to you in October. So included in the agenda is a memo as well as a comparison of the last 7 years of enrollment at September 29 or September 30th. And also for the current year, a comparison to what was projected and also a comparison to the actual in the prior year. So just around process, the projected enrollment for 24-25 was submitted to the ministry in February 2024. We use Beauregard Systems, the software, and also meet as a cross-departmental team to add local knowledge to those projections and finalize the projections in February once we have the kindergarten enrollment numbers. Supplement for unique needs enrollment is prepared in January, and that's based on the knowledge of the department heads. It's also compared to the February 1701 enrollment snapshot just to check for reasonableness. Ministry announced preliminary funding for the future year in mid-March, and they use the projected enrollment that we submit in February. So this is the enrollment that was used in the annual budget that was approved by the board. And then the funding will be recalculated in December based on actual enrollments as of September 29. So the recalculated enrollment is what is used in the preparation of the amended annual budget. And there are also 3 other enrollment collection dates. July for summer learning and cross-enrolled grade 8 and 9s. February, we look at continuing ed and distributed learning. Inclusive learning subsequent to September, and also newcomer refugees. And then in May, another look at continuing ed and distributed learning. Only the July numbers are included in the report that's in the agenda package because we don't have the numbers for the other 2 counts at this point. And as I mentioned, the report that's attached compares the current year to the projection, current actuals to projection, and to the actuals in the prior year. And I'll just highlight the increases that are in the report. And if you want to look, it's on page 71. So K-12 school-aged enrollment has increased by 153.5 FTE or 0.8% compared to what was projected. And it's increased by 341 FTE or 1.7% compared to the prior year. Actual kindergarten enrollments are up by 4 FTE compared to what was projected and down by 33 FTE compared to the prior year. Overall, elementary enrollments are up by 15 FTE compared to projected and down by 33 FTE from the prior year. And if we look at middle school enrollment, it's increased by 26 FTE compared to projected and 147 FTE compared to the prior year. Secondary school, we see has increased by 103.9 FTE compared to projected and 220.5 FTE from the prior year. The secondary increase is primarily due to an increase of 20 students and an increase of 83.9 FTE due to the headcount FTE ratio conversion. So every student that is in K to 9 is equivalent to 1 FTE, but from grades 10 to 12, we receive funding on the eligible courses that each student takes, and 1 FTE is equal to 8 courses. So historically, our secondary students take more than 8 courses on average. Our FTE calculation for the current year is at 1.103, which compared to last year was 1.109. And then shifting to the supplement for unique student needs. So this is funding that we receive as a district over and above the school age enrollment that I just reviewed. So inclusive learning is one area, and it has increased from projected at all 3 levels and from the prior year at levels 2 and 3. We understand the increase in level 2 primarily is due to new autism diagnoses and support needs, especially in the early years. And growth can also be attributed to an increase in overall enrollment and an increase in families accessing outside supports and or assessments. English language learners, or ELL, has increased by 4% compared to projected and prior year. This growth is due to an increase in ministry-funded international students whose parents are in Canada on a study or work permit, and also immigrant permanent residents, including refugees. Indigenous education has seen a decrease due to a large number of grade 12 students leaving in June and a smaller cohort of kindergartens arriving in September. And I'll just note that the Indigenous Education Department has worked with the 4 houses through the enrollment process, and they are aware of the numbers. And lastly, the ministry will announce the recalculated operating grant based on September 29 count in mid-December, and you will see the change in funding factored into the amended annual budget that will be presented to the board in February. And that's it. Happy to try and answer some questions for you if you have any.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. All right, so do we have any questions in relation to the enrollment data so far? And again, we can look at providing this data at a future ops meeting too, if we want to have some more detailed discussion. And thank you to the Secretary Treasurer for noticing that we didn't have it on our agenda, and for bringing it here to allow for some dialogue this month. Go ahead, Trustee Kwan, kick us off.
Hopefully a quick question. I just wondered if there was any special situations, or for example community builds or new community developments that we've entered into, or any other kind of things that we've entered into Beauregard that might that may have had an impact on our projection enrollments.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer.
Yeah, through the chair, my understanding is that the version of the software that we're using with Beauregard doesn't incorporate that information. And so that's something that we would have to consider as that cross-departmental team. If we're aware of anything like that, it would need to be manually added.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Yeah, given the level of development that we're continuing to see, it's imagine that is a very challenging aspect of our ability to estimate enrollment. But we are continuing to be very close. Okay, so any other questions in relation to the enrollment update? And again, we can look to layer this into a future ops agenda for further discussion. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm gonna move us along. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Appreciate you providing that update. We are now at D. This is the 2025-2026 budget development process. There is a recommended motion. Again, Secretary Treasurer, kick us off when you're ready.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just for everyone's information, we did bring this agenda item to ops on October 21st. There was some great feedback provided. I did make a decision. I kept that feedback, but I didn't make any changes to the memo or to the development process. Understanding that the board wanted it to come to the board meeting to provide some direction. So I haven't made any changes from last time, but I'm open to your feedback on how we might move forward with the process for the 25-26 budget.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Okay. So I'm going to first open the floor to our partners around the table to provide any thoughts or feedback they have in relation to the proposed 2025-2026 budget development process. And then, subject to that feedback, I will turn to my colleagues. Okay. Okay, so colleagues, I know we did have some feedback that we provided at ops, and having thought further about that, I think to get the conversation going, bear with me a second. I'm just going to quickly type something into the chat so that we can have something to start our discussion with. Okay. So, and apologies, my fingers are very slow at this time of day. But I think this captures at least what I heard from the board present and feeding back at ops. And so it would be that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, the usual preamble, approved the 2025-2026 budget development process with the following changes. And I'm just going to put this in the chat because it's quite long. And again, this is just to get the conversation going and to capture the feedback. So 1, student connections will be scheduled for 2 hours each and open to any student that wishes to participate. The key themes arising from each of the 8 secondary school 2023-24 student connections will be provided to middle and secondary students in advance of the event. 2, oh, and sorry, I should just clarify with staff. I know we have 7 secondary schools, but SJ Burnside is also reflected in that number 8, just in case folks were wondering. Number 2, 2 partner connection meetings with the board will be scheduled with each partner after the proposed staff expenditures and reductions are provided, and another prior to the board's 2025-2026 budget deliberations. So again, this is just layering in another opportunity for each of our partners to connect directly with the board, both after they receive notice of the proposed recommended staff expenditures and reductions, and then again prior to the board's deliberation, just picking up on some of the feedback that we got about wanting to make sure that there was an opportunity to speak directly to the board prior to the board's deliberations as things change and new recommendations and options come forward. And then 3, the superintendent will ensure that all proposed options from staff for both expenditures and reductions are presented to the board at the earliest possible stage in the 2025-2026 budget deliberation process. Again, this was a consistent piece of feedback that was provided at ops from trustees. And finally, 4, a budget 2025-2026 bulletin/newsletter summarizing the board's budget decision will be sent out directly to our entire learning community. So rather than just have the a press release or something focused more at the district level, we would have a proactive communication that would be sent out to each member of our learning community through each of our schools. So I think that captured everything I heard from colleagues at ops, but again, it's just to help us get started and to clarify our direction. So with all of that, there's a lot. I just want to pause and give everyone a moment to kind of have a read. And then I'll look to partners if they do have any feedback. Okay, so perhaps I can just walk us through the highlights and then I'll look to colleagues to see if there's any interest in moving this forward. And then if there is, then I'll look to our partners to provide us any thoughts. So the recommendations for the process this year would remove a number of the events and then we would be focused primarily on a larger event that would encompass all of our partners and the public, as well as a survey. We would be retaining the student connection events and also the partner connections. And one of the points of feedback that I heard from colleagues at Ops was around, first of all, the student connections, wanting to ensure, like, I think people had generally felt very supportive of the idea of layering in middle school students as well as secondary, wanted to make sure there was sort of adequate time to allow for feedback, and also wanted to ensure that all students had an opportunity if they wish to participate, rather than it just being limited to a few representatives, students. And then the Secretary Treasurer actually, highlighted the importance of having and sharing some questions with students beforehand. And the board really wanted to focus on the key themes that already arose out of discussions with secondary students during our last budget deliberation process, to be able to pick up on and elaborate on where we are, if anything's improved or if there are still some of the same concerns, but at the same time creating space for middle and secondary students to add and have some other points of feedback beyond the key themes from last year. And then two, again, we had last year one partner connection opportunity with each of our partners. This would, again, picking up on feedback I heard from colleagues at Ops, this would allow for two opportunities to connect with each partner. And those connections would be aligned with the timing of proposals from staff in relation to possible expenditures and reductions. And then another around prior to the board's actual budget deliberation, so prior to our actual decision making, to again just make sure that we've heard offline in a kind of safe space from our partners. And then finally, at 3, the superintendent, again, is just direction to ensure that all of the options from staff on both the expenditure and the reductions are presented to the board as soon as possible. That was a consistent theme of feedback from trustees at Ops. And at 4, again, the reflection of how do we communicate our budget decisions out. And there was some feedback around making sure that it doesn't just go up on the website through media releases, but also is specifically sent to each of the learning community through our schools. Okay, so that's everything. That's all I captured. Trustee Kwan, you're moving. Thank you, and seconded by Trustee Painter. Okay, I'm going to open the floor first to our partners. If you have any feedback or thoughts in relation to the additions or revisions proposed. President Hutchins, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair. On the amendment item 3, We've certainly heard from the parent community that when there are expenditures or reductions, it would be great to know the criteria that staff and the board are using to evaluate those decisions. So for example, I think there was 3 playgrounds that were funded in the capital budget last year for $150,000 each. And I've had parents come to me asking, what was the criteria used? How are playgrounds ranked? Is there a list or an evaluation matrix that staff use to help guide decisions on replacement schedules when? And the reason parents, of course, want to know is they're all really helpful. So with respect to item 3, if it's not too much of a burden, evaluation criteria would be helpful to help PACs in their own fundraising efforts. And then certainly for item 4 there in the amendment, subject to staff time and budget constraints, it would be wonderful if portions of that bulletin or newsletter, if not done in the past, could be translated into some of the key languages that are spoken at home, if not English. Certainly, I think it's 12.5% of the student population now is English of a second language or something like that. And so finding ways to even introduce it through a few sentences or a paragraph so they feel like they're pulled into the broader community would be wonderful if there's 1 or 2 other languages other than English.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that feedback. Just want to pause for a second. Secretary Treasurer, are you able to just shed some light on that feedback as it relates to the motion on the floor? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just comment I think I do understand what you're saying around being able to provide the criteria that was used around decisions. The example that was used was related to capital projects, which is actually outside of this process. That's a separate process that we bring through. It actually comes through the ops committee and the board. It's the capital plan, 5-year capital plan submission. It's done every year. So we can certainly bear that in mind when we're bringing those items forward through that process, to be sure to be prepared to talk about like why certain sites were chosen. And I'm sure Facility Services has a big list. I'm sorry, was there something else? I think the translation is a great point to make. And I think if we do move forward with the survey as well, I think we would want to make sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Thank you, President Hutchins, for the feedback. Trustees, I'll look to you in a moment if you want to make any amendments to the motions in light of those comments. But I want to return to our partners just to, again, check in to see if there's anything that any other partners around the table wish to share or provide advice to us about. Okay. So trustees, I'm returning to you then. Do we want to add an amendment to 4 to, I think I'm sure our staff will do it anyways. I think but if we want to put it in there for completion's sake, it's up to you. But I think the feedback's certainly been heard, and I'm sure we'll do our very level best to ensure that as many languages are reflected as absolutely possible. Secretary Treasurer or Superintendent, do we have a standard approach when it comes to translation of our key messages home to parents in light of the fact that so many more of our students, are from families where English is not their first language?
Thank you, and through the chair, we do typically, when we receive the information early enough, we do work with a community partner to translate. And I think given year to year and the changes in community, we're broadening the number of languages that we do translate, but we do actually seek outside support to translate for us.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay. Any other again, I'm looking to my colleagues. We have a mover and a seconder, but if there's any amendments that you wish to make, then now's the time. With a show of hands.
Um,
Oh, okay, that is unanimous. Okay, thank you, trustees. I'm going to move us on to our next item on our agenda. Oh, it happens to be question period. Okay, I'm going to turn to our staff. Do we have any questions? Again, just outlining for folks around the table tonight and also at home watching the meeting. Question period is an opportunity. It's 15 minutes that is dedicated on each of our board agendas at our regular board meetings to provide the public an opportunity to submit questions. There is one question per requester, and we will do our level best to answer the question this evening, either answer it on behalf of the board or direct it to the appropriate staff person. If we're unable to answer the question, we will come back to the individual requester with a response as soon as we can. And then the responses, both the questions and the answers, are then minuted in our board meeting minutes. So again, I'm just going to turn to staff and also look at my email.
Thank you. And through the chair, I have sent the 2 questions to you, Trustee Duncan. So there are 2 questions tonight.
Thank you very much, Associate Superintendent Arts. Okay, just bear with me a second. The board review data within worrisome online behavior reports, or WOB, or related monthly trend summaries of the program. I'm going to turn this over to the superintendent, but first, from the board perspective, so the board would not be involved in regular monitoring of this sort of report. That is something that is done by our staff. And anything that our staff feels should be highlighted or shared with the board, they would do that. Now, if it had to do with private information and it was appropriate to be sharing with the board, then it would be done in camera. That would not be something that would ever come to a public board meeting. But the superintendent is best placed to speak to this particular report and how they layer that into their operational responsibilities. Superintendent, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Actually, I'll pass it to the Safe Schools Coordinator who deals directly with this report.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you. If the owl, maybe I'll just be on audio, Chair, through you, the chair. No, there I am. Late at night, as you have said, and also that Superintendent Whitten also said, as Safer Schools Coordinator, we do use the data that's provided to us by worrisome online reports, otherwise known as WOBs. We look at the data and working with our district counselor and with our schools to support students, also to review trends that we might see from those reports. Generally to connect with schools. Most of the time when we do connect with schools, the schools have already have a wraparound approach supporting those students that we have received data about.
Thank you very much, Acting Associate Superintendent Powell. Appreciate that. We have another question that was ruled out of order simply because the requester already asked one question and we only allow one question per requester. So just to let that individual know, that is why we've only responded to one question. And then our second question this evening is, will the board continue to make their annual strategic working plans public on the website? I'm assuming that the individual is referring to the board and district work plan, but I just want to check in with staff to confirm that that is also your understanding of the meaning of the question.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that would be our understanding of the question.
Thank you very much. Kudos to the very astute individual that asked this question. We are going to continue to ensure that that is made public. There's a little bit of delay this school year because we are working diligently to complete it. So we are doing some work as a board chair and vice chair with our superintendent and our secretary treasurer to finalize the board work plan, the revised board work plan. So stay tuned. We're hoping to have that work completed, and then it'll come to and be a regular part of our regular public board agenda, and also available on our website. So apologies for the delay. We are working diligently to complete that work. And I think that was it for question period this evening. So thank you to all the requesters who took time to write in and to ask questions. We appreciate it. We have a number of items under G, public disclosure of in-camera items, G1 through G5 there for your information. And we have one item of new business under H1. And this was the motion that was added to the agenda at the beginning of our agenda setting discussion. So without further ado, I want to just double check. We do have it in the chat, but I want to go back up and just highlight it. It should be the first. It's the first motion in the chat. Just going to turn to staff. Is that available to everybody around our table this evening?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It has been posted. It is further up, so you'd have to scroll up in the chat.
Perfect. But everybody can see it around our virtual table. So thank you so much. Wonderful. Okay. Okay, so just a reminder, folks, the motion reads that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to provide the board and the Equity Ad Hoc Committee with a breakdown of student staff incidents for for each elementary school, and further break down each elementary school's data into student staff incidents in English track and student staff incidents in French track. And within these categories, indicate the number of students with an IEP, a designation, indicate the designation, or an assigned learning support. Note the nature of the assigned learning support by, and then in brackets, it's just indicating that we discuss and agree on a timeline if the board so directs. Okay, so I want to first, first of all, look to see if there is a mover and a seconder to start off our conversation. Moved by Trustee Mabobi. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Kwan. Okay, so I want to first provide an opportunity for our partners around the table if they wish to speak to this motion. And then I'll turn to trustees and to staff. President Hutchins, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask perhaps a question of clarification on the proposed motion. And it's on the second half where it says, and within these categories indicate the number of students with an IEP and so on and so forth. Does the motion propose that when there is an incident above, as noted above, that instance is associated with a student who may have a designation or an IEP, or rather is the intent of the motion to get at the number of students with one of those designations within each school and within each track in each school?
Yeah, good question. So let's review what it says, and then we can discuss sort of how that of course these things can be interpreted in different ways, and so we most certainly want to be clear. And so we're saying further break down each elementary school's data into student staff incidents in English track and student to staff incidents in French track. And then within these categories, so is this the bit that you're referring to, President Hutchins?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understood it correctly, that the resolution says, or the motion says, that within for each elementary school and for each track within each elementary school, that all of the data that follows would be provided.
Yes, is the short answer.
Okay.
That was certainly the intention. But again, appreciate if it doesn't read in a clear fashion, or if that doesn't come across, then again, we would want to clarify the board's direction if the board does want to proceed. Because we want to make sure that it's clear.
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. I think that is clear. I just wanted to clarify. I can just say from VC PAC's point of view that this data is critical in supporting the equity committee in doing its work and thinking about the policies and programs that the board has at its discretion to consider changes to. And it's a wonderful way to compare not only across schools but within schools as well. So thank you very much to the board for considering this motion tonight.
President Hutchins. Again, turning to our partners, if there are any other thoughts or comments in respect of the proposed motion. Okay, I'm going to turn to trustees, but first I want to just carve out some space for staff and for the superintendent in particular, who I know, has some concerns just in terms of resourcing and so on. So superintendent, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you, through the chair. If I could seek further clarity, just to make sure I understand what is being asked, that would be helpful, and then I can speak about resourcing. So first, with going back to the question around within the categories, is it the board's intention through this motion to capture, let's say, a student to staff incident, we're then delineating and saying that this student was in French immersion or in English, and if they had a designation or not?
That's right.
Okay, and then when we're looking at masking data, we usually do that when there are fewer than 10. So are we assuming that if there are fewer than 10, then the number would be masked?
Correct. We would
Okay.
want to make sure that we were complying with our legal obligations under FIPPA.
Okay, and then, sorry, last question, if I may, where it says or an assigned learning support, could you please provide further clarity on that? Where we look at it, we can suggest what learning support the individual receives based on their IEP, but if they don't have an IEP, they don't have a ministry designation. I'm not sure how we would, yeah, maybe just clarity on what information we're pulling in for that one.
Yeah, no, great, Superintendent. Thank you for the questions. And again, I think the intention, and again, we'd be very, very pleased to receive some advice about what, from an educational perspective, that would mean. But certainly, from the perspective of this particular motion, the intention was to make a note, so to provide some context of any assigned learning support. So not necessarily just learning support that's assigned to a student because they have an IEP, might be that, but it might also be an assigned learning support that is assigned to a student without an IEP. There might be an EA support, for instance. And so I think we want to be reading that very broadly. But again, if you have any advice about how that should be read, what is the most appropriate way to read that, then we would be certainly very happy to receive that advice.
I think, thank you for the clarity. I think that we would understand that to be any support the student would be receiving outside of their IEP. And so if they did not have an IEP, perhaps they're receiving support through an ELL, perhaps they're receiving support in a different mechanism. So I think if I understand that correctly, that's how we would interpret it and provide in a note section what support that individual was receiving.
Yeah, and I think that's what it calls for. So so obviously if a student involved has an IEP or a designation, and there's an assigned learning support, then we would want that noted. If there was a student that didn't have an IEP or a designation but had an assigned learning support, I'm not sure what scenario that might involve, but if there was a student that didn't have a designation or an IEP but had an assigned learning support, then
bit further, just so we could give you an idea of what pieces that we have access to. So we can access within our app the total number of student to staff incidents by school. We can access the number of students to staff in tracks, so we can look at that. And also we can pull off designations. Where we would have to look further into determining the data source is for a breakdown of students who have an IEP, and also an individual who's receiving learning support. That would be more anecdotal than it would be captured anywhere. So we would need to go back to the school and find out if a student who is listed in this report would, and what if any supports they're receiving. So those are not able to be pulled from any data source that we have, or one that we haven't determined quickly. But those would be two areas that we would want to go away and find out how we would determine that. And then lastly, also what the timeline for this report is, not when the report is due, but how far reaching in time are you looking for, back to what date?
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Okay, so I think there's probably a couple of questions. And thank you, Superintendent, for providing the additional context about what is already collected and available and what is not. Is there any information that learning support, so district learning support team would be collecting that would help fill in some of those gaps in what is already being collected through apps and so on?
Not outside a student who has an IEP or doesn't have an IEP. So I think that's really dependent on a conversation by conversation at the school level.
Thank you, Superintendent. And in terms of timeline and so on and how far reaching, I think, again, we'd be looking to have some discussion this evening about what that would look like. And be looking for some board direction, but also happy to receive any advice or suggestions, Superintendent, that you have for the board on those two areas. Okay, so I see that, and I'll leave that with you, Superintendent. I'll come back to you in a moment. I'm just gonna, I don't know, President Hutchins, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
I apologize because I know now you're calling on me out of order, and thank you for the opportunity.
Just if you have a question, otherwise, what I'll do is I'll go through everybody again and then come back to you. But if you did have a question, then we'll.
The question perhaps is if I'm the odd one out, I apologize. But thank you, Chair. It may be worth clarifying the intent of the motion one more time. As I understood the explanation when I asked my question, I heard something different than when staff asked for clarification. And I can elaborate on that now on the confusion, or I can wait until and certainly defer to you, Chair.
No, I think we want to be clear so that everybody around the table has a common understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve. So would you mind just elaborating on what you mean?
Sure. Another way to frame it would be, is the board looking for to understand if there's a relationship between student to staff incidents and whether or not the student involved had a designation, an IEP, or an assigned learning support. So there's an incident that happened, and then does the student in question fall into one of those categories? Or is the board just looking for information on the number of students with the designation, an IEP, or assigned learning support that are in a school and that's broken down by English or French tracks, but many of the students may not be involved in any instance whatsoever. And I can see value in getting both types of information. And that's kind of the initial clarification I was asking, is a lot of the data that might be available if the student's not tied to a particular incident might come from the enrollment report that we just went through on one of the previous items. And so there is a lot of data that's there on just the number of students with the different designations or IEPs per class, per stream. And so I guess looking I understood it one way based on the explanation I heard when I asked my question, but then hearing Superintendent Witten's clarification, it seemed to be that you were only looking for the data on designations, IEPs, on if the student was tied to an incident. And so just trying to understand if it's but one or the other or both.
Yeah, I think it's both, but again, I'm gonna look to colleagues to give me direction. I mean, and thank you for clarifying, what the nature of your concern. I mean, I think whenever you're asking for data, until you see the data, it can be difficult to understand some of the nuance. I think that's partly why you want the data, is so that you can start to look at some of those relationships, and start to identify, trends that exist and potentially structural issues that we need to look to address. But again, I'm going to look to my colleagues, because, my idea of what this is going to glean and their idea of what it's going to glean might differ. And again, we want to have a common understanding so that our staff will have a clarity about what it is that we're directing, if in fact the board supports the motion. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
I would agree that both would be valuable. I think, as you said, one is about perhaps the number of resources when we're talking about human resources in a classroom or in a school. And the other might be more about structurally about the type of resource, where it's perhaps a program or some other things that we would examine. So I think both are valuable in the sense of making decisions on where we need to put resources, whether it's in more bodies or whether it's in expertise or tools or that kind of thing too. So I can see a need for both sets of data for those reasons.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Trustee Painter?
I realize this gets into a bit of chicken and egg, but I've always found that I need to have a sense of what the question is before I can start to craft a request like this. And I have to admit, a bit of this is eluding me. I don't, for example, understand why we would seek to track, number of incidents of students with an IEP versus number of incidents for students with a designation. And then I'm unclear about how assigned learning support would actually be calculated. Like, I could understand if the question is that you're asking about what kind of learning support is available in the school broadly, I could see a number. Or I could see a number if the question was, how many of these students who are engaging in such incidents have an EA with them at the present time. But if it was something else, then I'm lost. I wouldn't know how to articulate it. And I think it's important to be able to first be able to ask the question, and I can't get my head around a bit of this. I understand the breakdown between English track and French track. That's pretty clear to me, just based on some of the previous conversations. But and I also understand why one might want to understand how students with different designations are looking at this, because that speaks directly to how they're being supported in their classrooms. But yeah, I really feel like there's some missing pieces here for me.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Are you able to kind of pinpoint, whether you think that there needs to be some clarity or an amendment? You mentioned support. So there might be some qualitative as well as quantitative data, right? It is not necessarily a matter of sort of boiling everything down to quantitative data. it might be that there isn't, it isn't all quantitative, but rather some qualitative data as well. I don't know, but the idea is to identify trends, and to identify, you know, structural issues across our schools that you know, we should be addressing, either from a resource perspective, or from a allocation perspective. Go ahead. Yeah, I just
Yeah,
want to
so-
unpack it.
Yeah, no, I would suggest if you're looking for trends, that's quantitative data. And I would actually suggest that qualitative data may be more challenging to present in some sort of a summarized version. I think where the value of the qualitative data comes in is when you start to perhaps perceive patterns, and there's the possibility to then put out a second request that digs deeper but more into very specific areas. And so I would rather than asking for everything right at the start, I would suggest narrowing this down to a couple of specific quantifiable categories, and then based on what that yields, to then ask a second question, because otherwise I wouldn't understand how we could ask staff to put together a qualitative assessment for all of these incidents, especially recalling how many there were reported. And then also the assigned learning support. If we're talking school level thing, then I would break that into two questions. What is the learning support resourcing in this school? And if it's, does this student have an EA with them? Then that can be an FTE qualification. So we know if it's a 0.5, if they're shared, if the EA has multiple students, something like that. Those two are measurable, and I think will help to narrow it down. I think asking qualitative at the outset is going to really drain resources and not give us much of an answer. I also don't know why, I don't understand the distinction between asking for an IEP versus asking for a designation.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Painter. Yeah, and I think the idea was that again, to understand, like, you know, students have IEPs. Is there a designation in that particular case? Is there not? Students have IEPs that don't necessarily have designations, right? So again, and again, like it might be that staff take this and they are able to quantify every aspect of it. I don't know. But if you have a suggestion in terms of making an amendment or making it, in your view, more quantifiable, please let us know. But we are getting close to 10:30, and so I will look to colleagues. I guess first of all, we are at the end of our agenda pretty much, with the exception of any notice of motions and then adjournment. But I do want to just flag that we do have 9 minutes left unless the board wishes to extend the meeting. And so if there are any amendments or any other contributions that trustees wish to make, then now is the time. Otherwise, I will move us forward and we will vote. Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
I think we need to put a timeline in.
We do indeed, yeah. And again, I was hoping to go back to the superintendent with some suggestions, because the other thing that came out of some of the HR reporting that we received recently was that many of, you know, the incidents occur at you know, a relatively small number of schools. So it may be that the superintendent suggests that, you know, we focus on that those small number of schools, I think, which represent about 75% of some of these incidents initially, in terms of addressing some of the superintendent's resource concerns. In terms of timeline, Superintendent, did you want to speak to that and provide some advice about what you think is tenable?
I can't commit the staff. I know that the staff here are already looking at what we can pull off, which would be fairly quick. But any qualitative data would take a long time, particularly if we're looking, again, are we talking about last school year? And if so, we wouldn't be able to go back and get qualitative data because people have moved on. Yeah, are we looking at for the month of what we've just had, September? I think I need clarity on how far back we're looking at, and then qualitative data is, it's not going to be pulled from anything, so it would take a long time to get, a long time in that it would take at least several weeks if it's longer than just a month's worth of information.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I think just to clarify, and again, my colleagues might have a different view. My own view is that we would be looking at the data that was used for the HR report that we just received. So, yeah, because I mean, it wouldn't be meaningful to have 1 month's data or a couple of months data. So we'd be looking at gleaning or using the same data that was captured for at least as a starting point, the HR report. But again, my colleagues might have a different view. In terms of timeline, again, the idea is to have some useful data for to support the work of the Equity Ad Hoc Committee and to support the board's work. And so certainly the board's direction was to have the committee reporting back with some recommendations in December. And so if, you know, that's the intention here. And so what's possible over, you know, the next few weeks, so that the committee would actually have time to consider the data and the board might have time to consider the data, I think is something we need to also keep in mind. As a, in terms of like as a measure to address some of the concerns, Superintendent, you have about resource constraints. What do you think about focusing the work that's envisioned by this motion on the relatively small number of schools identified in the HR reporting as a starting point?
Yeah, we're just reviewing the ops presentation. It was for the 23-24. I think it's the board's determination about what the relatively small number, when I'm looking at the report here, if we're identifying 20 schools, I think we can pull the information that I said we have access to. Qualitative information would not be possible though, because for the 23-24 school year, we wouldn't be able to identify what supports that specific student received if they didn't have an IEP. So again, I think it's trying to pull what we have access, and I think we'd be happy to bring that forward, as Trustee Painter said, and then you'd be able to look at what you can access and decide what further information you want. So we could then attend to it based on what you have in front of you. So that report, we could do our best to bring forward perhaps the ops meeting. I'm thinking like optimistically, the November ops meeting, if that would work. We could at the very least pull and show you what is available, and then you could request us to go deeper.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, so we have an option in terms of focusing first and foremost on the quantitative data that is already available and can be pulled. Superintendent said it's possible, using best efforts to do that by ops. Okay, so we have 4 minutes left. If we do want to give any direction related to this tonight, then again, sort of now's the time. And if we do want to give any timelines, like for instance, to provide the data that is available by ops, then we would want to layer that in. Does anybody have any thoughts? I know it's late, but we have 3 minutes left, and so if we want to give direction, now is the time. Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if we can just amend that motion to take out whatever we think is the qualitative and have the timeline as the November ops meeting. And then from there, we can always bring forward other motions for what we want further. So speaking to just that baseline data that we can pull that's easy to get for the ops meeting. And then from there, as a board examining that, or as an ops committee examining that, and perhaps bringing forward to the board other recommended motions for how we can look at that data even further. So I don't know if you want me to actually make an amendment here or.
Yeah, we've got
Yeah.
2 minutes left. So yeah, that would be what
Okay.
we're going to need to do if we want to move this forward tonight.
Yep. So I think we could basically take, I mean, I would have to look to the superintendent as well, but I from what I heard was, or an assigned learning support was qualitative. So perhaps taking that out for now until we can look at the data that is available. And then of course the timeline would be the ops meeting, November ops meeting.
Okay. Do I have a seconder for that? So again, just to reiterate, and Superintendent, is that correct from your perspective? So it would be taking out or an assigned learning support and then putting in by November 2024 ops. Do I have a seconder? Trustee Mabowi, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor with a show of hands of the, again, this is the amendment. And that is unanimous. Okay, so we have a motion as amended. Any discussion? Trustee Painter, can you make it very, very brief because we need to wrap this up.
Just my comments were in the chat. The only distinction I see right now is just distinguishing students with IEPs but without a designation and students with the designation. That, based on what I've understood, that's the one point of clarification I think is useful.
Superintendent, did you want to suggest any kind of further clarification? Are you happy that we have this data available to us?
Appreciate Trustee Painter's motion. I think what we have that was passed is similar. I think it's the qualitative pieces that we've taken out, but I will review the motion or ideas that Trustee Painter has put in and try to create the report that looks as clear as we can toward this and the motion that was just passed.
Okay, so just to clarify, we've just we passed an amendment to the motion. We have a motion amended on the floor. No, not to worry, Superintendent. It's late. We're just trying to work through these last pieces, but we want to make sure that it makes sense. And so whatever is in the chat is sort of, I guess, sort of secondary. We have a motion on the floor. And so I'm trying to call the question, but I want to make sure that that it's clear what we're doing here. So we have a motion on the floor. It's been we voted on the amendment that was accepted by the assembly. And so now we're voting on the amended motion. So if there's any comments, now's the time because I need to also move us to adjournment. Yeah, Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I appreciate the information that Trustee Painter has put in the chat, and hopefully someone can take that down because I think that will play into when we get the data that is available and we can examine it according to this criteria. So I think that criteria is important, but perhaps maybe we leave it out of the motion for now, but we keep it in mind for when we're examining the data.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think I haven't read what's in the chat, but I think we agreed that it would be a kind of multiple step process. The first would be to get the data that we have access to, and then we can kind of review where we are after that. Okay, I'm going to call the question because I need to also move us to adjournment. So again, trustees, all those in favor of the amended motion with a show of hands. All those opposed, abstentions. Okay, so the balance of the board in favor with Trustee Gagnon and Trustee Painter abstaining. And so that is what, 4, if I do my math correctly, and it passes. Okay, so, Superintendent.
Sorry, we recognize it's late, but we're just looking, was that a majority if there's 4?
You know what, Superintendent, thank you for bringing me back to reality. No, it's not. It's a majority. Yeah, no, it's a majority of the folks in the room, but it is not a majority of the board. That would need to be 5. So the motion fails. Okay, so I'm going to be looking for oh, Trustee Painter, were you did we have that wrong? Now I'm doubting myself. Secretary Treasurer, I'm going to just ask you to clarify how this vote should be considered. So we had 4 trustees in favor and 2 abstaining.
So, because our bylaw is not a simple majority, we don't remove the abstention. So I think we would still need to have a majority vote, so majority of trustees. So you would need 5.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Treasurer, for clarifying that. So the motion fails, and I'm going to call either for a motion to extend the meeting or a motion to adjourn. Trustees, I'm looking to you. Do you want to extend the meeting to continue this conversation, or do you want to adjourn? Trustee Mabobi, go ahead.
I move to adjourn.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Trustee David. All those in favor? All those opposed, sorry, all those in favor? And all those opposed? Okay, and abstentions. Okay, so we have Trustee Gagnon, Trustee Painter, Trustee David, and Trustee Mabobi in favor. Trustee Duncan opposed, and Trustee Kwan abstaining. So that means we are adjourned. Good night, everybody. Thanks for your contributions this evening.